In this video, I'm going to show you how to take your boring trap melodies like this and turn them into dark and impactful trap melodies like this. To do that, I'm going to walk you through the formula that has helped level up my melodies this year. Let's open up Ableton and get right to it. The key to starting off a dark melody the right way, and where most producers usually start off wrong, is choosing the proper scale. For this beat, I chose F sharp Phrygian because of the half step drop right next to the root note, and then the BPM is 165. Grab yourself a clean piano sound to start laying out your melody. I'm going to use the filtered piano from my Grim Trap bundle. You don't have to start on your root note. You can start anywhere in the scale as long as it sounds dark. And when you utilize these half steps, which are the notes that are very close together, it's going to sound a lot darker. Now I'm going to copy that across, and then we're going to make a change to the second half. Now I know you're tempted to start digging for other sounds and other plugins, but just trust me. Hold on, and I'll explain how to do that properly after the whole melody is built. I use a piano to make the whole melody because I can hear all of the notes clearly and don't end up getting lost trying to find that perfect sound before the melody is even made. If I can get the entire idea down on paper quickly, it ends up making the sound selection process much easier as well. And now that we have a solid top line laid out, I'm going to lay out some root notes for some chords. A quick tip to do this easier is to come over into the top right, click this little button here where it opens the grid menu, and change it to 1 bar. Now you can add in the chord notes very quickly. I think this sounds pretty good, so I'm going to turn these into some power chords. And power chords are darker than triads because it gets rid of the middle note. Start at your root note and then count up 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and place your note on the 5th. And these F notes are really low, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these and I'm going to shift them up an octave. And what that's going to do is it's going to make the whole chord progression sound a little more cohesive because there's less of a gap between the notes. And then to try to brighten it up a little bit, I'm going to highlight the bottom notes. And then I'm going to duplicate those up an octave as well. And then now with these chords, I think I want to add some passing notes to add movement between the sections. And then finally, we're going to scroll up above the whole melody, and then we're going to make a quick counter melody. This usually ends up being short sustained notes or arpeggiated notes. Once you're happy with the way your melody sounds, you can come up to the top here and click this fold button, and it's going to compress all the notes together. And now we're going to make it feel more natural. So highlight everything. And you come down to the bottom where the velocity editor is, drag everything all the way to the top. Now you come down here to this slider, which is your velocity randomize, and just bring it down a little bit, usually between 25 and 50. And then if you come up in your clip editor, you can grab your humanize knob and move it to about 25 to 30%. What this does is it moves everything off the grid and it makes it feel like a human played it. And now you can hear this counter melody is just way too loud, so I'm going to grab all of those notes by themselves, and then I'm going to drag those velocities way down. Once you have your melody sounding dark and full, you can finally start picking sounds to layer in. When choosing your sounds to layer for your melodies, there are 2 things to consider that are very important. The first thing to consider is the frequency spectrum. Let me find a couple sounds to explain that, and then I'll get to the second thing after we have those sounds layered in. So to start looking for sounds, grab your melody, and then duplicate it, and then turn off the original one for now. And I'm going to start by trying to find some type of bell. This is a really good start because it sounds dark and ominous. So I'm going to duplicate that layer again and find another one. And for this one, I think I'm going to look for a pluck sound. Now I think those two work pretty well together. As you start to layer in more sounds, things can begin to get muddy really fast. This is why you need to consider the frequency spectrum when selecting your sounds. To help visualize the frequency spectrum a little bit, I made this chart. Down here at the bottom, you can see the kilohertz range, which is the frequencies, and then what that range corresponds to in your beat. So the lower you go, you get into your bass and sub bass, and as you get higher into the 1 and 2Ks, you have your mids and highs, and then 10K and above I like to call air because it's just the bright, crispy sounds. It gives you a brief idea of different types of instruments that should take up the specific frequency ranges. To get a full and clear sounding melody, you're going to want to pick out a range of instruments that fills out the spectrum instead of stacking on top of each other. So let's add a couple more sounds. I know I usually always like to have a dark piano, so I pulled up my favorite preset in Noir. And I know that I want the piano only to be the chords. So I'm going to highlight the counter melody and delete that. And I think I'm going to grab the chord notes and I'm going to bring the velocities way up to make them more impactful. And then I'll get rid of the chords and the plucks and bells to remove that low end a little bit. I added this pad with a simple 2-bar pattern. And I think I'm going to add this violin to it. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's okay to go crazy with adding a bunch of sounds at this stage. That's going to help with the next step, which I'll explain after we get all of our sounds layered. So to fill out the low end a little bit, I added this respace. And now we have 2 different vocal variations, which is nice. And now that we have most of our sounds layered in, it's okay to have a few sounds overlap a little bit. Everything doesn't have to be spaced out perfect. We've taken a good amount of instruments that fills out the lows, the mediums, and highs for a broad range of sounds that fills out the whole frequency spectrum, but now we need to consider the sound field. I made this chart to show the sound field, which is similar to the other chart. It's going to show roughly where each instrument should sit in its final stages. So you're going to want your most important things right up the center, like your kick, your bass, your 808, pianos, and your lead vocals. That helps clean everything up, and it's going to make the whole mix sound wider. So I know I want my piano to be one of the main focuses, so I'm going to leave that up the middle. But our bell and our pluck, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the panning section, and I'm going to pan 1 to the left, and then I'm going to pan 1 to the right. So I'll play all 3 of those soloed. So you can hear how the bell and the pluck are out here, but the piano is right up the middle. Now the pad is going to be a supporting element, so we don't want that to be as loud. So I'm going to back that off a little bit. And then I think I'm going to bump the violin down a touch too. And then I'll do the same with the Reese because you want to be careful that it doesn't overpower everything. So I'm going to bump that down to about -16. And then I'm going to individually mix in the vocals. This is sounding really good now, so we can work on adding sections to the melody. So remember when I said you can go crazy picking sounds? This is specifically why. The key to making a good melody is to keep it moving, interesting, and adding variation. We know that all of these sounds can't be played on top of each other all at once. Start by working with 16-bar sections. So I'm going to duplicate this across a couple times for a total of 32 bars. To help visualize this, I'm going to highlight the first loop, and then I'm going to change the color of everything. So we'll make that red, and then the second one will be blue. We'll make the first one our hook, and then we'll make the second one our verse. Start by choosing the sounds for each section. Since section A is going to be our hook, it's going to want to have more energy. And don't worry, if you're still having a little trouble with sounds feeling muddy, we'll handle that in the final step. So I definitely like this vocal for this section, so I'll keep this one here. And then I think in the first half, I'm going to get rid of this counter melody, which is going to help add some variation to the melody. And then in the verse section, I'm going to get rid of those completely. And then I'm also going to get rid of the violin. And then I'll duplicate that vocal across again. But I'm going to bring that volume way down. And once you're happy with the way your hook and verse sections are laid out, it's time to move on to the final step. Now here's where we finish fixing that muddiness that I mentioned. This is the step that turns a good beat into a pro sounding one, and it's easier than you think. To get rid of any leftover mud, it's important to EQ the sounds so that they only occupy the space they belong in. So I'm going to start with the piano, open up my EQ, and since there's a respace, I'm going to bump the lows up a little higher than typical, that way they don't clash. And then the respace is already filtered because I did that for the sound design. So you can see that the respace takes up this lower spot, and then the piano takes up the higher spot. That way they don't fight each other. Now I'll go into the pluck and the bells, and we're going to take out most of the lows because they don't need to be there. And then the pad, I'm going to do some top end and a little low end. Now the violin is really bright, but it holds a lot of body. So I'll take a little low end out, just what we need. But I'm going to kind of boost the top just a little bit. And then finally we can EQ out these vocals as well. And now you can adjust the levels and panning of the sounds a little more if you need to. But I think this sounds pretty good the way it is. And now to glue everything together, I like to process all of the sounds at once. You can use a glue compressor, saturation, clippers, or any processing that you like to make the sounds work better together. But I think for this, I'll use a little OTT. So I'm going to drop that on the melody bus, and then I'm going to dial that back to about 30%. And finally, because we want the verse section to have a little less energy, I'm going to filter out some of the highs. And because of that, we're going to need to pencil in some automations. So hit A to open your automation lanes. And then I like to just use the on-off switch. So for the B section, I'm going to leave it on. And then for the A section, I'm going to turn that EQ off. And now that everything's finished up, let's listen to the final melody. If you enjoyed this video and learned something from it, make sure to let me know in the comments. If you want to see me flip this melody into something brand new, make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that video drops. And to watch more of my trap beat tutorials, click here.